This was written by the great physician, Sir William Osler. Though little, the master word looms large in meaning. It is the open sesame to every portal, the great equalizer, the philosopher's stone which transmutes all base metal of humanity into gold. The stupid it will make bright, the bright brilliant, and the brilliant steady. To youth it brings hope, to the middle-aged confidence, to the aged repose. Do you know what the master word is? Well, guess. Well, the master word is work. I've talked about this before, but it's been said that we need reminding as much as we need educating. Human beings have the strangest and most perverse tendency to take the best parts of life for granted. In fact, the human being has the capacity to take anything, no matter how great it might be, for granted once he becomes used to it. The actor in front of the cameras, the captain of a great ocean liner, the man at the controls of a giant earth-moving machine, the writer, the painter, the mother, all seem to let the charm and excitement of their work fade after a while until it becomes as humdrum to them as candling eggs. William Osler and the other great men of the past and present knew the real value of work, not just its value to those who benefit from it, but its incalculably great value to the person performing it. These people seem to have the capacity for never taking their work for granted. Instead, they found it filled with interest and reward, and became great because they did. I was talking not long ago with a top executive of one of our major oil companies. He had started his career working as a helper in a service station of the company whose nationwide sales he now directs. Why did he happen to see so much opportunity, adventure, and reward hidden in what the average person would consider to be the most menial and uninteresting work? It makes you wonder how many young men in the same work today are looking beyond the gas tank they're filling or the windshield they're cleaning. And it makes you wonder, too, how a person can take his most precious possessions for granted until they become dull and dreary or lose their charm and become uninteresting. His loved ones, his home, his health, his abilities, and his work. What happened to the excitement of the first days, when his wife, his home and children, and his work were new in his life? Greatness and peace and happiness are not proper ends for any human soul to set for itself. They are the byproducts of a life that has held steady like a ship at sea to some true course worth sailing. In other words, if the course to which you're holding is right, everything else you want will come as byproducts. Some true course. How does a person find some true course worth sailing? I remember some time back a man came to me for advice on how he might become a popular, sought-after platform speaker. He told me he enjoyed making speeches and wanted to make a career of it. I asked him what he wanted to say, and drew a complete blank. It became clear that he was ready to speak on any subject the entertainment committee wanted him to speak on. It wasn't the subject, it was just that he wanted to make speeches. I told him that he'd never become a great and sought-after speaker until he had something he wanted very much to say, something inside of him that burned to get out, that he felt needed telling. Speakers become great because of what they want to say. Greatness follows the zeal of their subject, and it's the same with some other true course worth sailing. A person needs to find the course in which he can lose himself, dedicate himself, and then the greatness and the peace and the happiness will come to him naturally as the bee comes to the blooming flower or a child runs to its parents. People who find their lives filled with confusion and uncertainty, with boredom and unhappiness, need to find a meaningful vehicle for their lives, something in which they can lose themselves completely. It needn't be some great cause, although it can be. It can be found usually in our present work, as a rule. It needs only be ferreted out. We need to know, we need to become, in the words of Dr. Maslow, self-actualizing. We need to become people who are steadily moving toward fulfillment, toward personal enrichment. Dr. J. Wallace Hamilton puts it pretty well when he asks and answers his own question. He writes, "What then are the basic laws of happiness, and how do we learn them? I suppose the clearest law upon which there's fundamental agreement is that this inner music of the soul which we've named happiness is essentially and inevitably a byproduct, that it comes invariably by indirection. To pursue it, to pounce upon it, to go directly after it, is the surest way not to obtain it." A person should have his roots deep in a great moving current, a moving stream of conscious direction which will keep him on course, sailing steadily toward the destination he's chosen, regardless of the economic and social winds that blow first this way and then that on the surface. In such a life, there's no great hurry, no frantic running about, no doubt or confusion. Instead, each day he moves a little way along his course, steadily, unrelentingly. In one day, he doesn't seem to make much headway to the casual observer, but like the iceberg, if you come back in a week, you'll no longer find him at the exact latitude and longitude of a week ago. And in a year, he'll have covered a really marvelous distance, while most of those about him will still be moving in circles and by fits and starts. They'll go tearing past him one day like the hare sped by the turtle, if you don't mind my mixing my metaphors, but he plods steadily on, never looking back, thoroughly enjoying the trip. And above all, he has the wonderful calm knowledge of his destination, and knows that each day finds him closing the distance that still separates him from it. Sometimes in his life, as in all lives, there are storms which tend to throw him off course, and obstacles which for a time may delay him. But soon, he's right back on course again, moving ahead. This is the life of the strong, serene person, the person of wisdom, the person who knows that he cannot do or become everything in his lifetime, so calmly chooses that which he desires and which best fits his proclivity, pushing everything else from his mind, and begins his life's journey. The life of such a man or woman always demonstrates the almost unbelievable cumulative effect of time well spent. His steady, unswerving use of time seems to make it compound, until in a very few years, he's miles ahead of all but the few who live as he does. He's like that great iceberg. His roots are firmly held by the steady stream of his belief. Emerson taught, "A point of education that I can never too much insist upon is this tenet, that every individual man has a bias which he must obey, that it is only as he feels and obeys this that he rightly develops and attains his legitimate power in the world." The meaning of serendipity, according to the Oxford Dictionary, is the faculty of making happy and unexpected discoveries by accident. And it means also the good things that almost always happen to a person following a bold course of action, serendipitous things. The word was coined by the British author Horace Walpole, who based it on the title of an old fairy tale, The Three Princes of Serendip. The princes in the story were always making discoveries of things they were not in quest of. Let's say you're trying to invent something. Frequently, you will stumble onto something entirely different and wonderful that you had no idea of discovering. Well, that's what serendipity means. Now, the point I want to make is that you wouldn't have made the serendipitous discovery if you hadn't been looking for something else. I'll bet you've heard people say of someone, "That's the luckiest guy in the world." But if you'll get to know the man, you'll usually find he's a busy, positive kind of individual who's always looking for new and interesting ways of doing things. Someone once defined luck as something you find when preparedness meets opportunity. It just won't happen usually unless a person's prepared for it. There are lots of interesting and pretty wonderful things that would be happening all the time to a lot more people if people weren't such stick-in-the-muds as a rule. Take the person who hates his work, for example. There are millions of people, I suppose, who actually loathe the work they're doing. But they stay with it because of some warped sense of security. Now, if they'd find out what it is they really love to do and prepare themselves for it, they could cut loose from what they're doing now, and the minute they do, this word serendipity comes into action. The good things that happen to a person following a bold, positive course of action. It's frequently found that a lot of boredom and frustration in our work comes from not knowing enough about it. You'd be surprised at the number of people who know only their own job, and that in a limited way, and who have no idea what's going on in the rest of their business. Frequently, a person in any given line of work can find interest, challenge, and just the job he's looking for right in his own business or industry if he's just taken the time to find out more about it. One of the greatest explorers who ever lived, Captain James Cook, began as an ordinary seaman. In 4 years, he had learned enough to become a master of his own ship, and later made the discoveries that, of course, made him famous. A happy, successful, serendipitous life, beginning as a common seaman. Courtesy. There's the secret to happiness in marriage. I'm convinced of it. No matter how you turn that word, it comes out winning. Marriage should have its foundation on love and mutual respect, but the years ahead, a lifetime together, will depend upon that word Mencken passed along as the secret of a happy marriage: courtesy. If a man and woman will be courteous to each other, they'll never take each other for granted. Their marriage will never become dull and common and stale. Courtesy is the thing that keeps a love fresh and alive. It's a strange thing, but if there's one person on the face of the earth you should show courtesy to, it should be the person to whom you're married. That person before anyone else. And yet, well, you know as well as I do that in all too many homes, that's the last person to be treated with courtesy, thoughtfulness, and respect. It takes thought and work to be courteous every day to the person you're married to, and that's exactly what makes a marriage work: thoughtfulness and working at it. People often think there's some kind of mystery to a really great and successful marriage. There's no mystery at all. Everything operates on the same law: cause and effect. The yard around your house will reflect exactly the care you're giving it. It can return to you in beauty and abundance, no more than you put into it. It's impossible. It's the same with a job, a business, a human life, a marriage, with everything. No secret, no mystery. You can tell exactly, precisely, what people are putting into a marriage by observing what the marriage is returning to them. And the most important ingredient is courtesy. How do you feel toward anyone who treats you with courtesy and respect? You like that person, and you like to be around him. And when this same common sense is applied to the one person on earth you've decided to spend your life with, it takes on whole worlds of new meaning and builds a foundation of solid rock under the love you have for each other. The children grow up taking courtesy as a matter of course. They see the fine and gentle way their parents treat each other, and they'll know how to treat their partner someday. There was a person whose only job was to hold a laurel wreath over the head of the Caesar and from time to time intone the words, "Thou art mortal." Now the purpose of this was to remind the man in whom such great powers resided that he too was, after all, only a man, and as such, mortal. When we're young, we tend to think of life as never-ending. Time for us stretches off limitlessly into the future. But as we get older, even in our 40s, which should be a time of vigor, interest, and activity, really a time of young maturity, we begin to get from time to time small reminders of our mortality. Oh, it might be a sudden shortness of breath or a perfectly normal twinge in the chest, a bit of back trouble. But we get these occasional reminders that time is not, after all, standing still for us, that we, like the Caesars of old, are indeed mortal. To the neurotic, this sort of reminder fills him with dread and plunges him into even deeper depression. But to the fairly normal, reasonably well-adjusted person, this comes as a reminder to enjoy to the fullest the time that is remaining. That days are not things to be waited through until Saturday or a birthday or Christmas, but rather to be savored and enjoyed one by one, hour by hour. We come to an understanding that to kill time, as we so aptly put it, is really nothing more than to kill a little part of ourselves, since time is all we have. It reminds us too, or at least it should, to be more patient, more tolerant of others, particularly those we love. If we're mature enough to love anyone, it means exactly that. And it reminds us to follow our hunches and obey our sudden impulses, especially those which involve a kind word or a pat on the back or a sign of tenderness. Those we love, as well as ourselves, are only passengers for the journey's duration, so let's let them know we enjoy sharing it with them. And if we don't always enjoy it, let's fake it. Let's pretend we do. After all, the trip really isn't all that long. I saw a newspaper picture not long ago of a woman of 75 ice skating. It reminded me that 75 is only old to people under 60. To people 75, it's a good, thoroughly enjoyable age, and maybe we'll all live to be 85 or 95, and maybe we won't. In any case, there is a limit, and there should be, or it wouldn't be there. And since there is, why not relax a little? Not take things too seriously. And as an old friend of mine once said, in a life where death is inevitable, never worry about anything. Sure, it's easier said than done. I remember reading a story about an old man who was planting a young tree in his yard. His neighbor hailed him and said, "What are you planting the tree for? You'll never live to see it grown." And the old man calmly went on with his planting and said, "I believe you have to plan on dying tomorrow or living forever." Well, I'm not planning on dying tomorrow. Ever thought much about how much time we waste and unhappiness we bring on ourselves by worrying about the future and reliving in our minds the mistakes of the past? One of the neatest tricks in the world is to learn to enjoy the present, since the present is the only time we'll ever own. Distance is no longer a serious obstacle due to modern means of travel, but time remains unconquerable. It cannot be expanded, accumulated, mortgaged, hastened, or retarded. It's the one thing completely beyond man's control. And while the supply of time is certainly limited for anyone, generally it's squandered as though there's no end to it. The man on the commuter train, bored, waiting to get home, then waiting for dinner, then waiting to go to bed or for a particular television program, and he thus spends his time slightly behind reality, waiting for something that's coming up. And while it'll keep him going, he never or seldom learns to enjoy the time he's using right now. But what it takes seems to be an awareness of living. It means being aware that you're alive at this moment, and that the world and people are interesting enough at any time, so that we needn't waste so precious a thing as time in boredom. If we know where we're going in the future, we can do our work the best we can, give it everything we've got, and we don't need to worry about it or the future. And as for reliving our mistakes of the past, this is the easiest advice on earth to give, and probably the most difficult on earth to follow. Everybody knows that it's perfectly useless to relive in our minds the dumb stunts we've pulled in the past, but this doesn't keep us from doing it. And again, according to the experts, the solution may be found in living for the present and enjoying it as much as we can. Now, this does not mean that we should not plan for the future. We should. But once our plans are laid, fine. Work on them, but don't stew and fret over them. All we will ever have is today. Yesterday is gone forever, can never be recalled, and tomorrow really never comes. If we find it difficult to enjoy the day in which we're living, we should remember that what we're waiting for will be made up of the same kind of days we're getting now. Frequently, a person who's unhappy by nature will believe that when something happens in the future, such as marriage, a better job, more money, or whatever it happens to be, that he'll suddenly be a happy person. But the facts don't bear that out. If we're living in the past, or worrying or hoping for happiness in the future, the best thing we can do is ask ourselves, how am I doing with the days I'm getting right now? How am I doing today? It's not how much we have, but how much we enjoy that makes happiness. The head of a great corporation died in his New York office of a heart attack. Later, when it came time to clean out his desk and collect his personal effects, a hand fishing line wrapped on a stick, complete with bobber, sinker, and rusted hook, was found in his bottom desk drawer. It was probably the one he had used as a small boy on the farm in the Midwest. Had that relic of younger carefree days represented his real dream of what living was all about? He had gone to school, found a job, got married, worked hard, purchased a home on the installment plan and the other niceties of living. Children had come along, and there was their education to think about. There were the promotions that came from hard work and native ability and the passing of the years. There were the clubs and civic things, the professional associations, the crises on the job and at home. And finally, the top job with a company that had grown very much larger with the passing of 30 years. The top job with its responsibilities to stockholders, employees, customers, research and development, finance. The kids were out of school and married themselves now. It had all happened so fast and with no real plan of any kind. It had been school, then job, then work, then promotions and family and income problems, and suddenly there he was on top of the pile. And rummaging in his things in the attic or the basement one day, he had come across that old worn-out fishing outfit with its tiny hook for bluegills and the red bobber with the paint all peeled off. The string had almost come apart in his hands, and he'd sat there and remembered that cool little creek with the summer smell of it and the green moss along the bank, the frogs plopping into the water and the water bugs skimming in the willows along the bank. He remembered the excitement of seeing that bobber suddenly disappear and the frantic tug of the fish on the line, and finally a nice string of them for dinner. And suddenly, he'd wanted to go back. He'd realized that had been living, that had been real and elemental and satisfying, and somehow he hadn't done enough of it. He hadn't had the time to just go sit on a bank and fish for a while and chew on a twig and feel the sun on his back and wait for the bobber to disappear. The time and the leisure to listen to the voice inside and get things straightened out in his mind as to what was important and what wasn't. Things like goals and rolls. So someone had called him, and he'd put the fishing outfit in his jacket pocket, and he'd thought about the next morning, too, when he took the outfit to his office, and looked at it again, and then finally put it down in that bottom drawer, tucked away, out of sight, but not out of mind. And then there'd been the coronary, and that had been the end of that. The fishing outfit was still in the bottom drawer, and when his wife went through the effects that they had sent home from the office, she sat with the fishing outfit in her hands for a long time. She saw him as a little boy, too, and maybe wondered why he'd followed the course he'd chosen.